What's up? Welcome back to part two of Astral Politics. My last video that I did on Astral and telling you how to Astral, telling you I used a combination of my own Astral experiences with, like when I deal with, for the most part, when I deal with spirituality, I read up a lot of different sources, but for me personally, at this point in my life, shamanistic sources for me personally, and it's hard because you don't really get too much shamanistic sources in books, so you have to kind of know how to scan it for information. But traditionally, shamanistic sources, the tantra, and when I say the tantra, I don't mean having sex, spiritual sex. I'm talking about tantra is the oldest form of yoga. Tantra is a lot more than just having sex. I like to go to systems. Taoism I like as well because Taoism has roots in Chinese alchemy, Chinese and Mongolian shamanism. I like tangible things. That's why I like Hermeticism so much, because Hermeticism, one of the tools of Hermeticism is alchemy, very tangible art. And I try to use those when I'm like, so I've combined my own experiences with the stuff I read from those systems, because my critique on a lot of the younger systems are that they focus far too much on the abstract. And that's not how, and which is, and I'm going to tell you why that's like this video, because this is going to be the Astral Politics part 2, where we're going to focus on the fourth and fifth dimension, the Pacific difference. And I'm going to show you why sometimes that ends up being a detriment if you're coming at it from the angle that the average spiritual seekers come at it. Average spiritual seeker, like in the past, when indigenous cultures ran the world, a lot of things you would grow up learning by the time you're like 10, 12, 13 years old. And if you didn't, you had the medicine woman, the medicine man who would take care of that, right? And you would, and if you're from certain cultures, yeah, you know certain things from like 10, 12 years old. And now, or sometimes younger. Now, when the Western culture took over the world, and the Western culture tends to be more materialistic. A lot of times what happened is that, and even when I'm not even saying, even if you want to say Western cultures, I'm not just talking about from Europe. I'm talking about even when you go to India, you have the younger versions of yoga outside the Tantra tend to focus more on abstract reality more. When actually the alchemists, if you study alchemic texts, again, not just from the alchemy text turning lead into gold, but the alchemy text is talking about alchemy as a spiritual science. It's kind of you need both. So you need balance, right? Because in the end of the day, thought, energy, and matter is all the same. It's just different frequency. So you need both, because the differences in frequency are based on your experience. That's what it comes down to. So just even saying they're all the same, you can kind of get confused with that too, because most of the time when somebody says they're all the same, they want you to focus on only thought. But in truth, all three different vibrations, when it's energy, when it's mental, then when it's energy, then when it's matter, all of them is different vibration, yes, but it's based on also your experience and your ability to connect the inner to the outer worlds. So it's important to know all three states. And that's what people don't understand. So the older systems tend to understand that. When you go to alchemy and they say, we about the closest thing to God is the minerals. They literally say in alchemy text, minerals and metals are the closest thing to God. After minerals and metals is plants. Literally, that's what they say, right? Shamanism. Literally, a shaman would say plants and animals, to some extent rocks, are the superior beings or species, and we learn from them. And in both setups, right? Both systems have a different way of explaining it, but that won't be any different than a scientist saying a human being's animal, and any animal. And part of the reason why in the industrial age society has made great technology jumps, but then we also destroying ourselves and the planet, is because sometimes we don't understand as animals. First thing animal has to do is harmonize with their ecosystem. That's the first thing animal has to do, and the average human being doesn't do that. So then, and I'm talking even the spiritual seeker in modern times. So when the spiritual seeker in modern times are obsessed with the abstract, they're not harmonizing themselves with their ecosystem, right? And now that opens up to the fourth and the fifth dimensions, because in traditional yoga, it's always thought that the fourth dimension is really where Maya is centered. Maya is centered. Illusion is centered. For the most part, that's not wrong. And, when you look at that, then when you compare that to how a shaman would see the world, the shaman, when we always talk about shamanistic plants, right? And they would talk about, the chemical properties in DMT, ayahuasca. These things, when a person consumed it, alter the person's brain chemistry, right? But the reason why the shaman was doing that, because in shamanism, they understood that traditionally, and remember, they may not even call it dimensions. They may not even call it the astral world. They may call it the spiritual, they may call it the inner world. But traditionally, in the fourth dimension, so when you combine what I'm going to say from shamanism with what the yogis understood, when you talk about the fourth dimension is illusionary in nature. So if 10 people go to the fourth dimension, they're going to see 10 different things, literally. The shaman understood about the plants and certain substances that would aid you in kind of organizing your visions. Because when they aided you organize your visions, it pushed you closer to realms that are closer to the fifth. And what's the fifth? The fifth is different now. If 10 people come in and they order the fifth, those 10 people, for the most part, there may be some differences because the astral senses still have to be developed. Some people's astral senses, it depends on how developed the astral senses are. But for the most part, all 10 see the same thing. That's the biggest difference. And that difference is when a lot of newer systems, especially New Age systems, right? Forget about newer yogas. New Age systems, which tend to be quick fixes based on one or two things they learn from the East, and to repackage it and give it to you, they don't understand that. So look what I just said. The significant difference. 10 people experience the fourth dimension. They see 10 different things. 10 people experience the fifth dimension, or realms closer, because, we don't just say dimensions. It's 4.5, 4.6, etc. 4.7, you have dimensions in between dimensions, right? Worlds in between worlds. But 10 people see those worlds, and they see the same thing, or close to the same thing. There may be differences in colors, like depends on how your astral senses are. The colors might seem different, or even the smells might be different. But for the most part, they see the same thing. And so people say, okay, wow, that's interesting. How is that relevant to today's spirituality? Well, there's life forms or intelligences or spirits, whatever you want to call them, on each realm. So if we compare the spirits in the fourth dimension versus spirits in the fifth dimension, they're very different. The spirits in the fourth dimension, for the most part, because the fourth dimension is not a spatial realm, it's more conscious, it's more based on time and illusion in nature. In order for fourth dimensional being to affect this reality, they have to tap into your energy. So what happens is, most of the spirits that most people and almost all spiritual systems are dealing with, I'm not going to say all, but most of them, right, they tend to be fourth dimensional beings. Meaning, they need an offering. Meaning, they need your energy, right? So what is that? So when somebody says, what does it mean by they need my energy? Well, good example. 10 people in the third, right, who experience the fourth, whether in sleep state or they put in a trance or they meditate, they tap into fourth dimensional intelligences, right? Let's say you have John and Bob. Bob is stronger than John. Bob and John tap into the same force in the fourth, but Bob is stronger, and when he taps into that force can do more things. People outside looking at that and say, that force is strong because look at Bob. But if John went to that same force, the same force wouldn't be able to do as much than the third because it's using Bob or John's energies or an offering that they're doing, whatever it's an animal or whatever the case might be, right? So when they tap into that, that's what they're doing. Basically, they need your energy or something else in the third to influence the third. Now, that's all right. That's not even bad. But if you look at many systems, so that's why for the most part, even when people argue about all these different gods and beings and which one is stronger and blah, 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 it doesn't really matter because most people making these arguments haven't done the spiritual work. So their energy ends up, in fact, when they tap into these spiritual intelligences, some of them end up becoming more unstable. Not the intelligences, the people doing it. The reason why is because it's taking your energy to do it, to make change. Now, if you were tapping into it the way you're supposed to, like meaning you're dealing with fourth dimensional beings, anybody in the fourth dimension, any spirit or intelligence in the fourth dimension can see more things. You tap into it, you get advice or you get information. Okay, you can do that. You go into for information, possibly you can do that. But then you also have to remember, this is also a fourth dimensional being. There's many other dimensions. That's not that elevated. So if I tap into that and I'm getting information from them, I have to still be cautious to it. And then that's why in some of the more mature spiritual systems, they made sure and get into science and try to combine that with spirituality. And they understood that just because a spirit or being says something doesn't mean you follow it. You still have to analyze it, right? And that's traditionally what fourth dimensional beings were. That's what most people are tapping into spiritually all over the world. That's why there's so much arguments. That's why we hear people say, I have my truth, you have your truth. That comes from the fourth dimension. Fourth dimension is the astral, but it's the lower astral. It's not that. Now, when I'm saying this, people could look at it and say I'm disparaging it, or I'm saying it's not important. Not at all. You ain't gonna experience the fifth dimension if you don't experience the fourth. The fourth is crucial. So I'm not throwing a jab at the spirits in the fourth. I'm not throwing a jab at the fourth in general. I'm telling you the nature of it. And then this is why certain shamans decide to take plants to aid them, to pushing them up to the fifth. Now here's the problem with that though. When you look at the more hermetic, the Kabbalicist ways of doing things, they didn't really like the plant stuff. In fact, if you look at the tree of life in Kabbalah, it was a map trying to structure. The map is actually structuring you is giving structure to the inner world. Right, so then you go to the fourth, then the fifth, and high, and 6 and 7 safely, and then beyond the 7 safely. It's a map, because even the best of us can get lost in the fourth, and that's what people don't understand. And for the most part, that's what you see most spiritual systems on. So why? So somebody would say, well, how come they don't want everybody to take drugs? Because I know a lot of people look at this and be like, oh, let's take some ayahuasca, some DMT. Why not? Well, the problem is when you take those things, it's like a door. It just stays open, right? So like, imagine if you can control your brain chemistry. You can see your stuff, see what you got to do, come back, go in the real world, and just operate like a normal person. At times, when you take substances, the door stays open, and then like any drug, a lot of times the substances were really meant to prove to the shaman that the world existed, or to prove to them not even just that it existed, to see the difference between the lower astral or the lower inner world and the higher inner world. That's what it was for. You take it, you see it, you say, oh shoot, okay, and then you then you strive to work your way up where you don't need that drug anymore to take it. But if you get dependent on it, yeah, door stays open and any spirit can enter you. And that's a significant difference. And then when any spirit enters you, insanity could follow. So then, hence, why certain people say, you know what? No spiritual drugs, because it has its own drawbacks. And so then when you compare that to the fifth was a completely different ballgame. That's why even some people used to say in ancient Kemet or Egypt, when a person was getting initiated, the person would see a vision, come back, right? Go in the inner world, come back, and then have to describe to his or her guru what they saw. If they got the vision wrong, then they would say, you failed, you got to come back again. No initiation for you. What does that mean? Well, they were obviously dealing with the fifth dimensional energies. The Egyptians were. Right? So when you're dealing with that, like I said, you're going to describe the same thing. And when I'm saying this is not easy. Like in fact, in yoga, when you see sometimes a yogi doing an advanced samadhi, right? And he's gone. And sometimes he's in deep meditation, so deep you can't even wake him up. Sometimes you would have to have a student or somebody have to watch his body because he's gone, right? Right, his spirit is like he's gone, right? He's alive, but he's in deep meditation. Now that's coming in because 99, like I could say 90%, 95% of spiritual seekers are just doing the fourth. When you talk about the fifth, you can perceive the fifth as being much further away, much more work to tap into without drugs, right? And then that's not, and talk about tap into in the physical, because then this ties into when the Tibetans, when you talk about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like, so for instance, we talk about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Tibetans will literally read you a book at death, and when you die, you would see those things, and when they read you the book, you will know how to navigate through death. This fourth and fifth dimension paradigm, it's in a sense related to that, because when you're trying to go, in theory, if you're talking about death, you're probably trying to go to the seventh dimension. So in a lot of parts of Asia, what the masters would do, they should do is, when in the West, when we talk about astral projecting, it's like fun, right? Like, oh, I can astral project. No, in these other places, when they talk about astral projection, it was to be familiar with the realms that they were going to, right? They'll be familiar with it. So at death, they were familiar with it already. So it would decrease how much amount of fear they have, because they understood that when you die and you're trying to cross over, the more fear you have, the more it blocks your ability to have a good transition when you're crossing over. So they would want to do that in the physical when they were alive. Astral project every night. Sometimes 20 years, 25 years go by, they would know the fourth. Once in a while, they would go to the fifth while alive. Some of them didn't. But when they die, they go to a fourth, no problem, and then these guys go to the fifth. Some of them who used to go to the fifth, when they were alive, they go to the fifth, no problem, and then hence, they go to sixth and seventh. That was what it was. So both realms have their own different laws. So in the fifth dimension, like I said, how I said the fourth dimension, they need your energy. Fifth dimension is completely different. Fifth dimensional spirit does not need your energy at all. Like at all. So the fifth dimensional spirit will be able to do stuff or force, will be able to do stuff that you can't deny. With the fourth dimensional spirit, so somebody says, well, let me get a new job. Let me pay for some work, right? You tap the fourth dimensional energies, pay for some work, you get a good job interview, you got the job. Okay. But somebody else looking at it could always be like, well, I don't know. That doesn't mean it's magic. That just means you worked hard. No, the fifth dimension is a completely different ballgame. Like, completely different. The fifth dimension can do some stuff like what we consider science fiction. It's a completely different ballgame. Completely. And again, before you go to the fifth, you got to go to the fourth. So this is not this in the fourth. This is basically to show you that it's not easy and it requires work. And it's not about quick fixes. Right? It's legitimately obviously related realms, but they're very different. And the reason why I don't talk about 6 and 7, because 6 and 7 is so far away that 6 and 7 are so different than our realm. Literally, your mind can't even put a picture of the 6th and 7th. Literally, they would say the 6th and 7th, you would have to experience it. Your mind can't even, like the 4th and 5th, you can kind of experience. You can kind of, according to some, the 5th, like I'll give you an example. The 5th could be like where some people see, what people consider elemental kingdoms, like how you see in TV shows like the Chronicles of Narnia, or fairies and gnomes, those things, right? Those are people those are things around that they would consider elemental in nature, fantasy in nature. Okay, you might be able to see that. You could picture that. But once you start going to 6 and 7, it's completely different animals. So people generally be like, man, it's so hard to get to the 5th. Why are we talking about the 6th and 7th? And I agree with that, because I think when you get the wisdom to start to understand how to navigate through the 4th and 5th, just even in theory, because a lot of people don't understand a lot of this stuff before you start, because it's like people don't realize before you even start doing serious work, you have to have the theory down. So even something as simple as when people say, I have my spiritual truth, you have your spiritual truth, that's 4th dimensional politics. Like if I go to Paris and I go to if I go to a certain location in Paris and you say this is building, Noir building 25, right, on so and so street, and somebody and Tom and me go and we go to Noir 1025 on so and so street, we supposed to see the same building. There is no I have my truth, you have your truth. That's 4th dimensional stuff. And I think a lot of people are under the fantasy that that's the case, and that's because unfortunately the most spiritual seekers don't realize they're just happening in the 4th dimension, which is the lower part of the inner world. That's it. And you have to work, first of all, to navigate through that safely, which is hard. Right? You got to navigate through that safely. And a lot of times you may not even do it when you're alive. You may just navigate through the fourth safely, but you have the structure. You got the routine, just like the Book of the Dead. They tell you what you're going to see. Then when you start, you cross to the fifth, and et cetera, et cetera. And some people in the fifth, they can do it. The fifth, they can do it when they're alive, right? And then when they're alive, then they just have to go to 6 and 7. So it's basically saying when you pass, the journey is still, it's not like, oh, I'm done. I'm in third, I go to 7, I'm done. No, you might go to third, you might go to fourth, fifth. And the difference is that there's a lot of other factors, but it's how you live your life. Because when you're here, according to some in shamanism and Sufism, you're here to get electricity. And I don't mean by electricity like in there that's powering your TV or your cell phone. I'm talking about spiritual electricity that is like, let's say yang. You know, in Nikang, in the Indonesian system, they'll say yang, right? You're here to get yang. Yin is everywhere. You get yang and you take it with you, right? Because basically in the Nikang system, they will say when you got yang, like when you're alive, you have both yin and yang. When you're dead, you just have yin. So if you die, so when somebody's dead, we're saying they're now yin. But if you can collect yang and take it with you, you can alter your experience when you die. That's the whole premise of ascension and the whole premise of why we're in the physical in the first place. So astral politics is often much deeper than people think. And yeah, there's a big time line drawn between the fourth and fifth. So in a recap, the fourth, which when Indians, yogis say it's where Maya is formed, where illusion is formed, it's not really wrong at all. Is where Maya and the illusion is formed for sure, meaning that it's basically an ever-changing reality that's fluid that we have to structure correctly to be able to go to the next stage. And then when you go to the next stage, there is no different truths. We all kind of see the same thing. You know, color might be off here and there, but for the most part, we see the same thing. And it'll keep getting worse as you go to the 6th and 7th. That's the difference. So astral politics is no freaking joke. And it's really more about understanding the different realms, the different intelligences, and understanding the purpose of it. When I'm making this video, this is not to bash the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is everything. The fourth dimension is where energy is formed, right? So we say Maya just means, or illusion is meaning when you see structure, it's easy to look at the structure of it and say, like, so if I see water in the fourth dimension, it's easy for me to say this is water and drink it. Instead of looking at the fourth dimensions where energy is, right? And if I see water, I know that the water is actually literally energy itself. And when they say it's Maya, they're just meaning that you can look at the constructs and get fooled and lose sight of what it really is. And when you lose sight of what it really is, you can become lost because the fourth dimension is endless. Like, think of it like this. The higher up the tree you go, or the higher up dimensions you go, the smaller it gets, except in the fourth. In the fourth, the size is infinite. It can keep going. When you get to the 5th and 6th and 7th, it starts to get smaller. It starts oneness. When people talk about oneness, oneness starts to happen as you go more up. So the fourth, that's why they say people get lost because it can go on indefinitely. That's a significant difference. That's astral politics. Fourth versus fifth dimension, part 2. Till next time, peace.